Hello, guys, and thank you so much for tuning into another episode of Crooked Illness. As you guys can see from the title, we are going to be diving into self-love and perfectionism today. I am joined by my awesome guest, Elizabeth Sue, who is a wellness writer and founder of Monday Vibes newsletter. I was so excited when Elizabeth reached out to talk about this topic because not only does she have personal experience with this topic, but she studied this while at Columbia University working on her master's in clinical psychology. Her work around burnout and perfectionism in corporate women and the science of happiness was given the honor of distinction in research and creative work. So I'm very excited to hear about her work, her experience, and her thoughts on self-love and perfectionism. So without further ado, welcome Elizabeth to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here. These are topics near and dear to my heart, so I can't wait to dive in.
Yes, I'm so excited you made it today and we get to dive into this together. So I want to hear from you. So before we dive right into this on here, tell me a little background about yourself and how you got interested in studying perfectionism and its link to self-love.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I'm a wellness writer and founder of a personal growth newsletter called Monday Vibes, and a mental health educator. And I've had many different career paths, but I spent close to a decade in corporate, most recently working in Silicon Valley, and that experience really led me on this path to finding my self-worth, overcoming perfectionism, and just confronting self-love in its various forms, because I was burned out and I was really struggling with anxiety, with an eating disorder, with insomnia, physical illness, you name it. So that's what led me to become an entrepreneur and study clinical psychology at Columbia and just dip my toes into this world. And so now I am here to empower women and change the rules of the game.
Yes, I love that. And I love that you decided to transition from what you were doing into this space. And I think the biggest thing that I got from you out of our conversation was the aspect of self-love and a lack of that at the time, when you were going through the burnout and all the stuff you were experiencing at that time, and really, understanding the link that perfectionism and self-love, what that relationship is and what it needs to be. So I was really interested to hear from you, talking about, especially from your own experience and also the research you've done, what have you found in your research and personal life about the role that self-compassion plays in overcoming perfectionism?
It's so good. It's so good. And I think that was the far and away the most insightful part of my research, because so I went into my research first to study burnout, because I was like, why am I so fucking tired all the time? And like, why are all my amazing female colleagues also tired? Why are my like kick-ass high achieving clients so tired? I wanted to really understand what was going on, and I didn't feel like people were really addressing the issue in the ways that felt satisfying. And that really led me to, we can come back to that research, but that led me to uncovering or really wanting to go one layer deeper or refine my thesis to perfectionism, because the research shows that perfectionists are more prone to burnout, and our society fuels a sense of perfectionism. So our society creates a world where we are burned out, where women, especially women of color, are burned out. And so I wanted to see the role that perfectionism played in all that. And so I wasn't really I wasn't really looking for self-love or self-compassion at that time. I wanted to like know the problem, but it was fascinating to learn that the root of the problem was a lack of self-compassion, a lack of
Mm.
self-love, a lack of unconditional self-acceptance. So Albert Ellis, who is a psychologist. Um, he has a lot of work around how unconditional self acceptance is the only way to overcome perfectionism. And when I read that, I was like, what? Like,
Wow.
I thought perfectionism, I thought it was just like, I don't know. People kept telling me just like lower your expectations or like be less hard on yourself. And I just didn't know what that meant. I didn't know how to do that. But when I started reading the flip of that about unconditional self-acceptance, and then Kristen Neff, who's this amazing psychologist who studies self-compassion, I was like, wait, she has the coolest job ever. She has so many studies, study after study after study. I read them all about how self-compassion is actually a better motivator to achieving goals than
Mm.
self-criticism. And that was a total game changer for me.
Wow. Because I remember you telling me about that. And I really love how you also bring up the point of you wanting to get to the root of the problem. That's what you started with. You wanted to see how what burnout and perfectionism, what was the link there, what was causing that. And that led you to finding out about self-compassion and really seeing what
Yes.
that does. Because like you said, we really are in a way almost brought up to focus on perfectionism, right? Because we talked about, when you're younger and you're in school, you're taught to, fix this area, fix this area. You're not good in this
Mm-hmm.
area. And we want to be good in all of it. If you're not good at math, fix that. You're not good at science, you have to be good in all of it. So it's like we're really
Yes.
taught, you need to get good in all these different areas. But then, especially when you bring up that point of when you discovered that self-compassion plays a greater role in overcoming that perfectionism compared to being so critical on ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
which is almost kind of what we're used to, I feel like, because when you want to
Totally.
really break it down, I feel like people in general tend to be hard on themselves anyway. So we're not really taught how, like, there's no like class you go to or in school, like, self-compassion, we're going to teach you
Right?
guys how to do this. No, it's not, that's not how it works. So I think that's really interesting you bring that up and really discovering, you know how that helps with perfectionism. So because you know that's not something that we're typically taught or really exposed to, I feel like.
No, and I think I shared this with you before, but perfectionists often don't think of themselves as perfectionists. They think of themselves as they're just focused on self-improvement. They are high achieving. They want to make the right decisions. They want to do good in the world. And so these people often have like really big hearts um at, and set really high standards for themselves and simultaneously have high expectations set on them. And so I think it really is important to think about that, because it doesn't really matter whether you call yourself a perfectionist or not, but it takes the form of people pleasing, of burning the candle at both ends, being exhausted, self-sacrificing, choosing, you know, other people's happiness over your own. Like those are all different forms of perfectionism. And also, interestingly enough, procrastination is a form of
Mm.
perfectionism. Um, Being scared to try new things is a form of perfectionism. And yeah, self-compassion, what's really cool about it is not only does it, I mean, it just feels better to love yourself. Like
Yeah.
it helps your mental health, but it really, I mean, the research shows it helps with that resilience, because um, you no longer associate achieving a certain goal with your self-worth. And I think that separation is critical, because otherwise we just get so wrapped up in either the expectations we set on ourselves or what other people think of us. And that, I believe, is at the heart of the suffering.
Wow. Because I wanted to ask you as well, so if you could say why do you think it's more common to be critical and hard on ourselves when working towards something than it is to have compassion?
Ooh, it's so good. I think it goes back to what we were saying. That's just what we're taught. That's what we see around us. It's interesting because I reflect a lot. I think everyone does on their healing journey about their relationship with their parents. Like,
Yeah.
where did this come from? And I look at them and they are so self-critical. And people often think, I mean, the studies suggest that kids that become like very perfectionist oriented have parents who are really hard on them. And I don't believe that's true. I believe, especially if you're sensitive or empathic like me, all you need to do is like see with your eyes or hear with your ears or feel with your body. You can observe when people make a mistake, how they react. And my
Mm.
parents are really hard on themselves. They judge themselves very harshly. And so because of that, I started to judge myself really harshly, and any mistake I made could have been, you know, mitigated. There's this with perfectionism. There's this feeling of control, and and a desire to want to control everything. So when you get really hard on yourself, usually what happens is you're thinking, oh, I could have said something better. I could have made a better decision. Like, how could I be so stupid to like leave my keys in the car? Or gosh, I should have read the signals of this person that they sucked, or this job. It's a lot of what ifs, as if we could have known better. And I think that's where the issue is with
Mm-hmm.
this idea of self-improvement, that self-improvement without self-compassion is self-criticism.
Yeah.
Because if
Wow.
you think you could always have done better, I mean, you forget that you're human, and you forget that making mistakes, like whatever that means, I don't even know what that means anymore. It's like, it's all learning.
Mhm.
That's an essential part of the learning process. If you never make mistakes, what do you like? You're like living in a box doing the same thing
Yeah.
every day.
Yeah. Because I feel like it's almost like we tie, in order for, like you said, self improvement, in order to have that, you need to be hard on yourself. Because it's like, I feel like there's this thing of when you have self compassion, you're being soft. You shouldn't be like that. You need to be, like cracking the whip, hard on yourself, push. And I feel like that's kind of, it's so weird to think about it that way, because I feel like even when you're sitting here and you're thinking about having compassion for yourself, you feel like it's almost like a weakness almost, and you're like, I can't
Totally.
I can't be like that. I can't. I need to fix this. I need to focus on this. I need to. And like you said before, last time we talked, it almost seems like it's never enough. Like we're always, okay,
Mm-hmm.
we did this, you met
Mm.
this, now what else is wrong? And now, okay, this, and then it's this, and then it's never like you never do have compassion because you're so focused on the next thing. And then also when you bring up the thing about mistakes, like when you were younger, like when you see people make mistakes and how they react to that, how they respond to that, and how sometimes they're like, oh, that's bad. That's kind of almost what makes you not want to try new things
Yes.
when you're a perfectionist. Because you're like, what if I, like, if you're trying to go skiing, you're like, what if I fall, what if I mess up? What if,
Totally.
and then
What if
it's
I
like,
make a fool
yeah.
out of myself? What if I hurt myself?
And all these scenarios, you just keep playing in
Yes.
your head of this, I'm not going to be good. I
Yeah.
can't do this. I need to stick to what I know. I need to stay in my place. I need to stay doing this. And And I like how you also bring up there's so many different forms of perfectionism, like procrastination and
Mm-hmm.
the, fear of trying new things and all different things that could be tied to the perfectionism part of it that you've somehow developed through whatever it is. But I think that's very true because I can say for myself, like when I was in school, I would wait to the last minute to do anything, and I would get and I'm like, no, it has to be like this. I'll do it later, and then but it's like, how is that a way to live? Though that's not a
Right.
good. It's very, very high stress.
Yeah.
Very, like, you wait till the night before to write a 10-page paper, and then you see that you got a good grade, and you're like, oh, I can just keep doing it. I can just I got rewarded for that. But
Mm-hmm.
it's it's so bad. It's so bad. It's so bad.
It is so bad. It is so uh it's ever present. It's so I'm at a loss for words. It just like overtakes you.
Yeah.
And then you wake up and you're just like, what is this? My life? Is this how I want to lead my life? Just this ball of stress. And
Mm.
I'll also add, and I think we talked about this before, but their systems like the workplace environment really reward this kind of living. And so that's why it can be so hard to get away from. So I want to
Yeah.
offer the listeners some self-compassion in this moment because I was also there. It's like logically we understand that this sucks. Like it sucks when you're so, like, when you just hate on yourself like that. And at the same time, those are the messages that we're being bombarded with. And you can look at it in the wellness industry, in media, in Hollywood, like everywhere, especially for women. It's like hyper focused on your flaws and insecurities and like what to do to fix those or solve those, and that you are not okay, you are broken, you need to do something right now if you want to ever be loved and accepted.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking a lot about that, like as I was doing my research and reflecting on my experience in corporate, because one of the four norms of toxic workplaces or toxic masculinity in the workplace, which is really what we're talking about. We're talking about the patriarchy, is show no weakness. And I was reading that and I was like, gosh, if that is what's rewarded in the workplace, of course I would be terrified of making a mistake. I mean, I remember being yelled at for like a typo in an email. Yes, of course, we want to strive for being the best and being professional, but we are human, we make mistakes. And also back to the perfectionism thing, if you have a large workload, which we're all overworked these days, like you're just trying to get through, like you're just trying to dig out of your inbox. And so it's kind of like you can't have it both ways. You can't penalize for mistakes and expect perfection and want things to get done.
Mm-hmm. Wow. That is so true. I wanted to ask you, if have you noticed any commonalities when it comes to unpacking where the root of perfectionism stems from in certain people?
It's a great question. And I So the short answer is yes. I have a lot of theories of my own. For a while there, I wanted to pursue my PhD because I was so passionate about this. And then I was like, that's going to be another 7 years. And like, I got work to do. So I got to just jump in and do it, overcome the perfectionism, because sidebar, perfectionism can also show up as thinking that you need like every credential under the sun in order to
Mm.
be able to have an opinion.
Mm-hmm.
So that is definitely present for me. But I think one of the perspectives of perfectionism that I don't think is talked about enough is how perfectionism is the oppressed doing the work for the oppressor. So as you were
Mm.
talking about how perfectionism keeps us small, keeps us from not making mistakes, keeps us from not voicing our opinions, if you look at it at a higher, like if you zoom out, you're like, oh, that's oppression. Like that's a very specific way of keeping people down and keeping people out of power.
And you're doing it to
And
yourself.
right, isn't
And
that the sick part?
that's crazy to think that, because usually, when you think, I mean, I feel like there's so many things you could think of when you think of perfectionism, but one of them that I wouldn't think of is, you're preventing yourself from something in some way. I'd be like, no, 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 no. I'm like, perfectionism, like you're doing great. You're always doing great. Like you're doing
So
really good.
detail oriented.
Yeah. So it's like to think that you are what you just said, the oppressed doing the work of the oppressor. You're the one oppressing your own self and you don't even know.
Isn't
That's
that a trip? I mean, when I was starting to make that connection, um, and I was doing all this research, in tandem to like some deep inner work in therapy. And like I was starting to see these themes of how I was self-policing and how I was self-censoring. And my therapist was helping me uncover the fact that um, it happens, I think, across the board, but especially when you're sensitive and you pick up on these things, you internalize them and then you become your own
mm,
oppressor. And it is so, like, that is why it's so layered and so deep. And that's why I just cannot emphasize enough the importance of your own inner work, because sure, at like I go off on the system all the time. I'm just like, fuck the patriarchy. And at the same time, by age, I'm 32, by age 32, like, yes, it's part of the system, but now now it's me. Now I have
mm-hmm.
internalized that. So yes, we need to change the system, but also we have to it's now our burden, like that we have to deal with, because it's now become a part of our psyche. And so when you have that inner critic, like, just remind yourself that's not you. That's not like the heart of you. That's not, if you think of yourself as like a little girl, she's not berating herself for
Mm-hmm.
eating a bag of chips, or like the way, like her outfit or whatever. She's like living her life carefree. So we don't come out of the womb feeling insecure. We develop this, we develop these
Mm-hmm.
voices. And so to be
Wow.
able to separate that, I think, is part of the journey.
Yeah, and I also like the other point you brought up before of when you are like that, like a perfectionist, you tend to, do that to other people. And that's
Yes.
also what, when you bring up the point of your parents who are so hard on themselves and then that reflected onto you and then also, or even people in your life who are that way tend to also maybe they're not intentionally trying to do that, but it just happens because of just the way that they are and the way that they, are used to being, maybe they're not trying to like be like, what's wrong with you? Like, why didn't you get, a good grade on your paper? That's
Right.
weird. No, it's like not they're like they're trying to do that, but it's because I think that they have set such a level for themselves that if they don't reach that, then it's almost like the end of the world. Like everything's over. They need to always be at this certain level and to see that. And that's also what is kind of sad to me too, is like if you're like that, thinking about, you know, one day doing that to your own kids without even knowing it, right? You're like, I would never do that. I would never, say that to my kid. I would never make them feel like that. But then like you said, you don't even realize you're doing it to yourself. You don't know you're oppressing your own
Ex-
self. So how are you going to
exactly.
know you're doing it to you?
Exactly. And
Yeah.
I think that's one of the common misconceptions too, is when you do it, people think when they do it to themselves, it's in isolation And it's like, no, people are, I mean, I really have had to distance myself from friends who are very self-critical about their bodies, because that is extremely triggering to me. If I'm sitting there trying to enjoy my meal, I've had like 8 years of therapy in order to be able to do that. And they're there just like counting the calories, or like, forcing, this happens, forcing like half a cupcake onto me because they don't want to eat the whole, like it's a whole thing. Or they like look in a mirror and nitpick their bodies or talk, misery does love company. I also had to distance myself from people who were still in corporate that like really hated their life. And I was, over here trying to create a life that I actually liked. And so and then as I got happier, that also created tension, because people, when you have such a limited perspective, and you kind of get committed to your decisions and your path, because again, I think that is part of perfectionism, is not being able to let go of control, not being able to like entertain. Perfectionism has a lot of black and white thinking. So not being able to entertain like other possibilities or other options, or maybe something works for me, but it doesn't work for you, or vice versa. It just kind of, I think of it more as like this rainbow. It's harder to, when I'm around people who are so kind of in their own stuff, it's difficult, because then I feel like I can't really express myself. And that becomes a problem when you're on this journey of trying to live your best life, or your most authentic life. And then when you're in a conversation or a relationship with someone who's like so kind of fixated on
different
on
things,
something,
right?
then it,
Wow. So, I mean, I love how you brought that point up, because I wanted to ask you too, like for you, like what other things, so I know you brought up the point of distancing yourself from people who are like that, and who, and I know for me too, like it's sad, because when when you know them, and you like, you want to help them, and you want to help them like stop or come out of that, but it's like you just can't. And it's taking so much out of you and out of your own self. So what other things have you done to help with your perfectionism?
And I love that too, because at the end of the day, we can only heal ourselves.
Yeah.
And the cool part is, even in the context of my family, like when I was just starting, therapy, and my mind was blown, because I was like, oh my gosh, there's just a better way to live, like a more peaceful way, a more loving way, a way where if you have compassion for yourself, you by default develop compassion for others. And my family is very scientifically minded, so of course I like dug up the studies and sent them to them, and they just were not interested. And that was really painful, because I really wanted them to come on this journey together. But what I learned over the years is, when I show up having done the work, and I am not as triggered, or I am, more able to set boundaries, or I, don't entertain when they go off on, when they gossip about whatever I don't care about, then that changes the dynamic for everyone. And families don't like that, or friendships don't like that. And no relationship really likes change, because they're used to a certain dynamic. But if you want to show up, if that dynamic is not working for you, by just cultivating compassion for yourself and like doing your own practices and your own work, that will inevitably change hopefully for the better. Sometimes it brings people apart, but that's good information. That's good for you to know, because then you can make a decision.
Mm-hmm. I think that's so important. Like you said, bringing up the fact that you are doing the work and, seeing the change. And also, like, the whole thing with the dynamics of change, like people not liking change. And we're so used to, this way and that relationship and things going like this. But then when it's not good for you, like when you're noticing, how this, perfectionism and the criticism, the burnout, all these different things just circling, and that's just the way your life is. And you're like, this sucks. Like, I don't want to live, I don't like this. I want to change. I want to figure out, ways to do that. And you really, doing the research, looking up the studies, doing the work that you've done, trying to get away from that, trying to learn, self-compassion, trying to educate yourself on what that is. What does that look like? What could that do for me? And, how you're feeling like how your days are going. I just
Mm-hmm.
think that's, like that's really all we can do, right? Because ultimately everything is, up to us if we're going to do it or not. And you're doing it and you're, happy and you're teaching other people about this, because I think that's really important. Because, I was happy you reached out to me. I was like, hell yeah, you want to talk about that? I was like, self-compassion, self-love. I was like, okay. I was like, let's do
Yes.
it. Let's do it. Because I'm like, this is a thing that, and especially, you know, people need more of it. Because I feel like even if you're good on self-love, there, you can always do more. You can always have
Oh
more.
my gosh. That
So
is the truth. I mean, I'm constantly, and sometimes I have guilt because I'll have days where I really feel like a monster. I feel like a failure. I feel like, what's really showing up for me these days is around money, because I left a job that had reliably good money and to do my own thing. And I am still in the beginning stages of that. And so I've really had to untangle my worth from money or success or hard work. And on those days, I'm like, who am I to teach about self-compassion? Who am I to do? I mean, I'm there just talking horribly to myself. And luckily I have friends who are just like, stop talking like that to my best friend. Like,
yeah.
and
Oh,
they help anchor me in, that 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 my ability. And then usually I write about it. So writing is a big part of my self-compassion journey, because that just is my main healing tool. It's a way that I'm able to express myself in an unfiltered way. I mean, it took
yeah.
a long time and sometimes I still get scared of the things that I write about because it's so public. But at the same time, I really want to show people like the good and the bad and the ugly.
Hmm.
Emphasis on the bad and the ugly,
Yes.
because we just are in this sick Instagram reel highlight world
Because it's
where
real. I love it that you're showing that side of it, which is more rare, because we're not used to that. And I think that's so important and so awesome, because you also brought up another good point that I didn't think of until just now. So when you were saying, like, I feel like you could also say that imposter syndrome is like
yes,
linked to perfectionism, like
yes,
feeling like
100%.
you're a fraud, or you're not good enough, or you shouldn't be, like you said, like, who am I to try to like teach people, like, like, why am I doing that? What kind of authority do I have? And just constantly questioning yourself, like, I don't have this, I shouldn't be doing that, I shouldn't be talking about this, no one's gonna. And it's so crazy to, because there really are so many things that you could link back to perfectionism. But I feel like just continuing to keep talking about it, have more conversations, and, you know, continue doing the work that you're doing, continue writing, spreading the message and doing all that stuff, because you seem like you're really fired up and you really love it. And I can see it. You're always like smiling, excited. And, you know, I think that what you're doing is great and it's awesome and it's important and people need it and will get a lot of benefit out of it. So I just want to say thank you to you and really for, you know, coming and having this conversation with me and, you know, popping up on the podcast and all of it. So
Yay! Thank you so much. I do care so much about it and just want people to know that, I don't know, living your best life doesn't mean living a perfect life. It means living an authentic life. And sometimes being authentic means making tough choices and setting boundaries and doing things that make you uncomfortable. But in the end, you are your inner authority. You know best what's how to live your life. And that, to me, being able to make aligned decisions is at the heart of self-love.
You guys heard it here. You heard it from Elizabeth just now. That message, all of it, amazing, amazing. But you know what? I just want to say to everyone listening, you guys, whether it is the nighttime, whether it is the daytime, whatever time you are listening to this, I hope that you guys really enjoyed this episode and got as much out of it as I did creating it. So thank you, everyone. And also thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Yes. I can't wait to post this and put this one out there. Woo!
Woo!
All right. Bye, guys. And bye, Elizabeth.